The episode goes here, Case.
Yeah, right here, Case. While you're feeling sleepy. It's here. You're welcome.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass at Another Pass. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
Sam, what do you think about Marvel Phase 2?
It was a phase. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would say overall it ended up being a pretty strong phase, but I think it started off a little bit on the soft side of relative quality, at least up until that point. I like Iron Man 3, and then I like the movie that we're talking about today, because today we're talking about Thor The Dark World. I like it well enough, but they're definitely weaker ones in the early era of Marvel movies. And I am intrigued that I couldn't help but sort of start the conversation pretty much the same way that today's episode is going to be. For those of you just tuning in, Another Pass at Another Pass is where we navel gaze at the early episodes of the show before Sam joined the cast and got a chance to give her opinions about some of these movies. So this is a chance for us to re-release some old episodes in formats that might be a little bit improved, and certainly will be available, which older episodes are not necessarily available on all podcast players. So that's what we're doing here, and we're talking about Thor The Dark World. And Sam, before we get into the episode, is there anything that people should really know going in?
About the episode itself, the sound quality is good, and we have Geoff on, and we love Geoff. If people have been listening to a lot versions, they're gonna know Geoff by now, right? And he's great. His insight's great. I actually think that both of you come up with much better plans for how this movie could have been enjoyable for me. So I can't wait for people to hear it, and then to talk about it.
Yeah, I will say before, just so people are aware, we come out swinging. Like this episode starts, and then we are immediately into like criticism of the movie. There's like no like, hey Geoff, who are you? Like blah 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 blah. Like there's no patter beforehand. It is just immediately like, oh, right to the face.
Yeah, it's definitely a Case and Geoff were having a conversation kind of episode. Like it was just like there, and to be fair to both of you, there is a lot to swing at in this movie. So
yeah. It's certainly a thing when when Geoff and I are on episodes together. Usually there is about 25 minutes that we cut off before we actually get into the episode. So that is probably what was happening there too, which is that we had been talking for a while, and then I was like, oh wait, we should actually do the show. But yeah, so like you said, audio quality is pretty good. Geoff always has great audio quality. Mine is fine. I can hear a little bit of like some kind of like a hum in the background when my audio is going, and when he's talking, it goes away. So it's definitely like my mic is picking up some sort of like room tone. But that's about it for like technical issues. It doesn't sound particularly bad, and it's a pretty tight episode. I think it clocks in at about 50 minutes. Yeah. Not a terribly long episode, a little bit longer than some of the ones that we've got in this early slate, but certainly not in the bad end of that. Not getting into some of our marathon ones that we've done. Just you wait. Just you wait.
I cannot wait.
But yeah, so why don't we just get into the episode and let people hear what we're talking about.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Thanks, folks, for tuning in to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and wonder of wonders, I happen to be joined by Geoff Moonen.
Hello again, everyone.
Geoff, I am so happy to be talking to you today. We are discussing Thor The Dark World. It's about a week out from Thor Ragnarok coming out, and I wanted to like sit down and kind of go over this movie since it's a weird one.
It is. It's not necessarily a bad movie, but it's certainly the weak one.
Yeah, I would argue that this is the weakest Marvel movie we've had so far. And by that, I mean like the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, not outside things like X-Men's and other Marvel properties, but ones
we don't
Marvel.
Count Fantastic Four.
No, God, no. Although
I agree.
someday I'll do it.
Oh, geez.
I've got ideas. But this is an interesting one. You know, I would say that this is sort of proof that the Marvel movies have generally been good movies, because I would definitely say this is the worst of the Marvel cinematic movies we've seen so far. There's some other ones, but I think this is the one that has the least going for it to redeem itself. Like Iron Man 2 and 3 both have some complaints, as does The Incredible Hulk, but I think those movies have some, you know, redeeming quality that people can kind of get behind. Like The Incredible Hulk was the same summer as Iron Man 1. You know, they were like, all right, we got to do these movies to get the series running. And there was a lot of creative control issues between it because no one knew what a Marvel movie was like.
Right.
But overall, I think it was an enjoyable movie with cool sequences. And
it stands on its own.
It does. It also sets up the later stuff. Like if you look at it as a prequel to Captain America, not in timeline, but in terms of the chronology of movies, or even as a sequel, like it's interesting to see this thing where like this is the military super science in the more crazy era versus the Captain America. It's more just like really good steroids.
Right. And again, it as its own movie stands in terms of like good science, bad science, rawr. But when put up against Captain America, it becomes so much deeper. And that works. That's fine.
Yeah.
I feel Thor The Dark World is the one Marvel movie most relying on all the others. It feels less like its own movie and more like a connecting piece.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense without anything that came before it or really anything that came after it. There's too many of the stakes rely on the implications of what are to come.
Yeah, this was basically a setup of probably the most important thing that happened in this movie was the mid-credit sequence about the Infinity Stones.
Oh, yeah. And that wasn't even directed by Alan Taylor.
Yeah, so if your most important feature is a bonus feature, something isn't working.
Yeah. Like Thor 1 had a lot of interesting stuff going for it. And I think it's really important to the Marvel Universe. I think that's the other one that, outside of the three I mentioned before, where it's really out there and strange, and it sets up the cosmic world for the first time. And, you know, it probably could have been a stronger overall package, but I think the tale they told of Thor, like this redemption arc of an arrogant asshole, worked pretty well. I think the performances they got were great. The appearances were great. The vibe we got from everyone was great. We're like, this is Thor. This is what the truly superpowered beings look like in a world that has come to become kind of blasé by like Iron Man existing.
You know, in my head, phase one, I call phase Coulson. And so, you know, this is the thing that raised the stakes for Coulson because he was the one keeping all of this under wraps. And then all of a sudden, what? You're a god? I can argue. And then phase two. So,
right.
But,
yeah. It's so weird looking back at phase one, which I think is such a masterpiece of an achievement. Like, no individual part is perfect. Iron Man 1 is a great movie, but like has severe issues in terms of keeping the stakes raised without it sort of feeling cliched. Incredible Hulk, as we just discussed, has some weaknesses. Iron Man 2 feels like it's the mid-step. You know, they're not quite ready to finish up the first phase, so they're like, all right, we gotta buy some time to set up Thor and Captain America.
It was an interesting way to develop Tony's character further.
Thor is weirdly I would argue, like this huge opera as a superhero movie.
Yeah, it is. Why do you think they got Kenneth Branagh?
Oh, yeah. And then Captain America is a movie that I think makes all the other ones better by its existence, in that it it fills in all the dots, like all the pieces all of a sudden come together, and then you get to Avengers, and Avengers is legitimately just a great movie that you're like, oh wow, I can't believe you took all these disparate things and now you've got a cohesive story that honestly you can watch that movie and you don't need to watch anything else. But this movie, it's enriched so much by everything else that it works so well.
And that is the joy of being a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, seeing things as individual pieces and seeing how they also all boost and bolster each other, where they resonate and become bolder, where they support and become stronger.
Yeah, but Phase 2 is not the elegant machine that Phase 1 is. Like, Phase 2, yeah, sure, Iron Man 3 is a direct follow-up to the Avengers in terms of how Tony Stark is dealing with it. And The Winter Soldier is very clearly a sequel where we take the stuff that had been set up in the world that we've established, and that arguably is where the Avengers are actually formed. Not in the movie itself, but like in the wake of it, because by the time you get to Age of Ultron, the Avengers are a team, but at the end of the first Avengers, they are not, and nor are they in any of the movies leading up to it. Like they say, oh, Captain America got the band together, and that was the true forming of the Avengers. Like they were brought together before for an event, but this is actually them becoming a true team, or they've become what beforehand. And that story's not that interesting. Like Captain America goes and finds everyone, and it's like, all right, guys, we're going to go take down Hydra. And those stories would not have been character-driven stories, so I'm fine with skipping that.
Yeah.
But you could argue that Thor The Dark World doesn't really do much for Phase 2. And really, it may not even pay off until the end of Phase 3.
Right.
And by that point, we're going to have another Thor movie before we get to the actual payoff. Because Thor The Dark World did not really up the ante for Thor in Avengers Age of Ultron.
No, it certainly did not.
I mean, you could, like, even Guardians of the Galaxy, which is as unconnected as you could possibly get, sets out some of the rules of the things that come into play later. Thor, it's the mid-credit sequence. It's a little bit of like, just sort of like exposition that gets dropped here and there that like sort of start to change the stakes, but it doesn't really matter.
I agree. Because the big thing of Phase 2 is about the fallout and the continuation. It's all well and good to come together to fight this huge alien invasion that came to New York. Bully on, boys. You beat them back. And, look at you being a hero, Tony Stark, but you nearly died in the vacuum of space. And in lieu of you fighting alcoholism, let's give you PTSD. That makes sense. Captain America, you've now woken up in a strange new world. You're adapting beautifully. You've led a team in an amazing adventure, and now you're working for the government doing these things. But you were Captain America during a war, during the great grand whatever, and now that wears on. And can you ever go home? And those are things that are asked of him in Age of Ultron, and that's his continuation. They don't really do any of that with Thor in the Dark World.
No.
And I certainly have a thesis and an idea for what it could have been, but they didn't do it.
Yeah. All right. So enough about like just the gushing about Marvel in general and the weaknesses of this movie. Let's start.
We could do that forever.
Yeah, we could. I mean, you and I have done this. We almost tried to do a podcast series just talking about how much we loved the different ones while getting really drunk. So we can definitely do that for a long, long time. So we can move on.
That'll be next year's spinoff.
Just keep it the same.
Oh, God, yeah.
Be exactly this podcast.
More or less. But anyway.
So let's talk about what kind of works, what kind of didn't, like the things that we could kind of tweak. Because when we're talking about this movie, the rules of the discussions here have to be what could conceivably have been done at the time to make it better.
Yes.
And, we're very much locked into casting. We know a lot of information about who else was up for it. But for the most part, with the exception of the villain Malekith, no one's really new. Like they switch out who plays Fandral. But that doesn't really matter. And, it's already an actor who was up for the part in the first place and just couldn't do it then.
Yeah.
There's only so many things you could change. And you can't just say like, well, 4 years later, Patty Jenkins makes an amazing, also mythology-inspired superhero movie. So really, she should have been it. And I don't actually know if she should have for this movie. I've looked at the info from what they've said she was doing, and I don't know if that's quite right either. I think there was just a lot of people who had a lot of thoughts about Thor, and none of them were very strong.
Yes. Now, this is very much, even more than any other Marvel movie, it feels like a movie by committee.
Yes.
And it leads to a lot of these things are exciting because we know they're supposed to be exciting, not because we feel excited. There's certain space opera elements that go on, and don't get me wrong, watching a starfighter battle happen in a Marvel movie definitely tickled my Star Wars fanboy just a little bit.
You know what? Let's talk about that because that I think is a note that I had to discuss, and I don't have a great time to bring it up, which is the decision to really hammer home the technology and magic fusion concept of Asgard. That wasn't really in the first movie. Like the thesis is presented in the first movie, but it really does look like magic. Whereas in this movie, it looks more like guns. It looks more like ships. It looks more like holograms. It looks more like Star Trek.
Yeah.
Or Star Wars, really, except with the trappings of Viking culture. And at the time, that sounded great. As I get further away from it, there's a few spots that feel a little weird, but I can't really fault the logic.
Yeah. It's like watching Yoda with a lightsaber.
Yeah, it sounds cool when you first hear about it.
It sounds so cool. And then, like, if you feel like it's going to be the best feeling in the world, it's going to be a raging bonfire, but it turns out you just pissed the bed. And it's warm for a moment, and now you're cold and wet, and you don't know why.
Yeah, like, I don't think it's terrible. Like, I think the movie looks good overall.
Yes.
It's darker in tone, and this was an across-the-board thing of Phase 2. Like,
Agreed.
Phase 1 is very bright and flat. Like, there's an argument that, like, the CG heavy nature of Avengers 1 forced them to have like this like very soft color scheme that allowed it to hide the CG. And really with Iron Man 2, you start seeing much more like an amber tone to things. There are a lot of oranges and like sunset lighting kind of effects.
Yeah, very much so.
And this movie has a ton of that. It's very orange in a way that you wouldn't really expect, like orange and gold.
It's practically the look of Asgard.
Yes. And then Captain America Winter Soldier is a lot of night stuff going on. And when it doesn't, it's a lot of grays and blacks and, a little more desaturated.
Yeah, a little darker.
And then if you look at Avengers 2 compared to Avengers 1, Avengers 2 has this like yellow-orange color scheme that Avengers 1 definitely like feels blue.
Yes, it does.
And it is jarring. If you just look at those two movies side by side, it's a very shocking change in color tone.
Yeah.
So this movie has a lot of that, like kind of like gold sort of look to it, but I'm cool with a lot of it. They do a lot of cool effects to emphasize the sort of Asgardian super science way. Like the golds all glow gold.
Yes, they do.
The weapons actually glow, which I thought was a nice effect.
And I noticed upon rewatching it that a lot of the colors of the shield, of the weaponry, of everything else, it reminds me of things you see in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes, especially the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, and it reminded me of I'm blanking on them, the Perfect Society in Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Oh,
chased after them.
Yes. Oh, God, I forget the people's name, but yeah.
Right. But even their color scheme, like for their interfaces and for their shields, it even has that similar kind of design to it, or it made me think of it. And I appreciate the consistency.
Yeah, I wonder if there's sort of an implication of this is how super science works in a certain scheme.
I would imagine for MCU, there's a couple of design documents that are.
Yeah, I had thought that like blue was kind of their like super science thing, like the Hydra energy beams and the Tesseract, and then the arc
Tesseract
reactor.
energy.
Well, yeah, and ultimately it's revealed that the Iron Man armor is basically powered by a synthetic Tesseract. Mm-hmm. So you can sort of argue that that's sort of how it all works. But up until that point, a lot of the Thor magic had been blue also, mostly his lightning, but there was
because you can only make that so many colors.
Right, and there was sort of this implication that like the reason Iron Man's armor could be charged by Thor's lightning was that they were like compatible technologies.
Yeah.
But it's hard to really say.
But they're interesting unanswered questions. They're actually interesting because they're unanswered.
Yeah. What I liked how the weapons and shields glowed. Like the shields when they were struck flashed, kind of like Independence Day, but with like this golden light. And the weapons, like the swords when they were swung, had this like white light to them.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool touch, and it actually makes me think that I really would have liked to see more of, and this is just a general design thing, so it's not really part of a pitch, is I would have really liked to see the weapons that they use for their space battles and stuff to feel more like Viking weapons that had like stars like compressed into them. Like Thor's hammer houses like a dwarf star that's been pressed, so maybe like lesser energy sources or just how Asgardian technology works. Like they make arrows that really if you described it to anyone, would sound like magic, but it's actually like this like perfect nuclear weapon or something like that, forged into like this narrow shaft or into this bow that could create these energy constructs.
I agree.
Like instead of like laser guns, like make it a little bit more like medieval weapon, but energy medieval weapon.
Kind of like Chewbacca's bowcaster.
Yeah, exactly. Like this whole cultural thing should have reasons for it. Like they have specific things that need to feel that way, and that's how they sort of built up their technology. So that
and that's how Earth got it as well. Like because there's that idea that Asgardians existed. Are they gods? Well, the Vikings of old certainly thought so when they first saw them.
Yeah, but to make it so it didn't feel like just an affect. Like otherwise, like Odin shows up at one point. He doesn't really feel very magical in this movie. In fact, almost every time we see him do anything impressive, it's with like a staff laser. Same with Burr in the prologue. Mm-hmm. Like that at that point, it's just a rifle. Like whereas in the first movie, he could rip the godhood away from Thor.
Yeah,
and it would have been nice to just sort of feel like the technology was so integrated into everything that it didn't need to have these like shapes and forms that look like weapons that we understand. Like it should be that like they infuse a much more medieval style culture.
Yeah, and one could argue that it probably aired more towards the side of conventional weaponry so people would know it's conventionally a weapon. But people can also make the leap when you see, oh, that weird archaic-looking thing is wrecking those ships. It must be a weapon. So I can see why they went that way, but I agree with you. I think they should have gone a little harder on the Viking trappings in a way, and the infusion of magic and science, which actually goes very much into my thesis for how I feel the movie should have gone.
All right, Geoff. So I think that's a great lead-in. What's your pitch?
My pitch is the fact that the first Thor was very much about being fit to rule, to being, worthy of being Thor, to wield that godhood to be. The second movie should be a little bit more of what does it mean to succeed? And not in the sense of how to succeed in business, how to ascend to the throne. That is a little thing that's mentioned in this movie. And with the idea of the Dark Elves being a fight of Odin's father, there is this notion of, son succeeding father, ascending to the throne, and secrets left behind. Odin believed the Dark Elves destroyed, whether on Bor's word or legend, and Thor contemplating what it is to defend his homeland, what it is to fight for what he believes in, what it is to, be worthy of King of Asgard, as well as the fact that Loki did everything he did to be worthy of being king as well in his own deranged way. So I think they really didn't spend enough time at Asgard. They also could have made an excellent shadow to the first film if, okay, you allow Jane to be infected by the ether or infused by it or whatever you want to call it, but you then bring her to Asgard, where Odin is upset because it makes all of Asgard into a target. But no matter what, everywhere is going to be a target, and Thor is trying to defend the 9 realms, which he just brought peace to. But this also draws out, the consequences and everything else. And I don't think they should know it's the Dark Elves at the outset. They just know something is after the ether. And I feel more of the fight should be brought to Asgard, so you can have more of Jane there. So you have more moments like her calling the Soul Forge a quantum field generator, and that breakdown of science and technology and an exploration of that. And there are so many great characters and people already cast in the first film that make a return for the second. And that gives them a little more room to breathe, a little more room to be. And if you want to have a little bit of stakes of it reaching Earth, great. But we've had Earth threatened so many times, and we certainly gave a big crap about Guardians of the Galaxy without them ever going to Earth. It's not that, we as human beings don't care if the stakes aren't Earth. The stakes can be Asgard. Ragnarok could be threatened. And so I think with them coming to Asgard, you can certainly have not just Thor and Loki time, which I felt was some of the stronger character moments. You get a little more of Odin in there.
Okay, I can dig that.
Yeah, whether it's confronting Odin about his decisions and not just going behind his back. About you can still have the terrible sort of plans that happened in Thor the Dark World, but in quicker bursts and smaller ways. You don't have to have the Warriors 3 and Sith basically be that Kitty Pryde episode of X-Men, that pilot where it's like everybody gets left behind because they're fighting this one problem to the next one to the next one. So it's just you guys now. No, let's actually explore this, please. Show the kingdom, damn it.
No, that works actually really well with some thoughts I had. I had this thought when I was watching it, which was that doesn't it kind of defang the tension that the Rainbow Bridge is fixed right at the start? They make a thing in the first Avengers that it was a big effort to get Thor to Earth to come after the Tesseract. And then the Tesseract, which I don't think they've said, but I think is the space, Infinity Stone.
I know they've identified it. I think you're right.
It's how it creates portals. Like the energy that it provides are portals to other dimensions, and it allows free movement from the different realms. It'd be really interesting if that's how Thor was going about this now disconnected, broken series of worlds. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, open the movie instead of with this prologue that echoes the first movie but has less thematic weight, is not as interesting, doesn't really have payoff with the reveal that Loki, is a frost giant actually, doesn't do really as much for the story in any way.
Yeah.
Open with Selvig giving his rant on the chalkboard about the convergence of the 9 realms. And then you can start having your story where Thor is able to freely move, but chaos is broken out and people are the peoples of the 9 realm are starting to be able to move between the worlds because of the convergence, but they're getting stuck there. And that's causing even more chaos. And the reason why Thor couldn't just come back is because there's only one thing that Asgard has to move freely between the realms without huge issues.
Right. And so he basically can only do it on official business.
Right. And so he was there on Earth for this one thing, but now he's got the Tesseract, but it's still super selfish. He can't just go to Earth to see Jane because it's such a huge tactical thing. It'd be if there was only one plane for moving troops around and it's well, I got to get back to see my girlfriend.
No, you don't.
Exactly. That's how important it is. And I was thinking that, well, what if part of what was going on is that the Dark Elves, they sort of set up as being this force that existed in the dawn of time, and then but we beat them, and now they've fallen back, and as far as we know, they're all dead. What if they weren't all dead? What if they were just a broken people?
Yeah.
And what if they had been deposed from their home? They had been exiled from their home realm, and because of this convergence, they were able to come back to it
and regain their strength.
And what if that realm was this decimated kingdom?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is actually what Asgard does to people who they conquer.
It's true.
With the frost giants, it was hard to really tell because of this icy world. But what if the implication was everyone Asgard has conquered by force and not diplomacy? You are left a broken society. At best, you're going to be in your homeland, but stripped of all your might and power. Mm-hmm. And at worst, you are going to be completely away from your home and all your possessions, reduced from all glory, and it'll be a terrible fate for you and your children.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was thinking of in making it a story of succession, you have this idea of the dark, people think that before the universe there was nothing. They're wrong. There was the darkness, and it was terrible. You have the Dark Elves living in the age before the universe. And then the light comes. And it's this fact of they're just trying to hold on as things move on, trying to pull us back, move back, regress. And it could be another statement on things or another avenue of exploration of, even one of the lines in the movie, everything has its dawn and has its dusk. And who determines that? And that also plays in just as much of having them as a decimated people. Who gets that say? How high up does that go? Or how far down?
Yeah. it would be nice if like the final battle actually we got to get some exposition from Malekith being like this land was once my people's and it was your family that stripped us of it. Like Malekith in this movie hates Asgard and hates, he's never met any of the Asgardians that we see.
I don't even think he knows Thor's name by the end of it.
No, I don't think he does, which is crazy. Like, they do a lot of things in here to sort of like just have him be kind of a generic villain. And it'd be nice if at least we gave him some pathos beyond just like, I want to make stuff dark again.
Right. We must turn off the dark.
Yeah, I got it. I got you.
Anyway.
Because that's what's missing in this movie. Or, I mean, that's one of the things that's missing in this movie. Like,
yes.
The style, like Alan Taylor is the director, and he's mostly known for doing Game of Thrones, which I think is the inverse of what Thor should be. Like Game of Thrones is finding the human element in a fantasy setting, but having that like the fantastical nature stripped down. Mm-hmm. I would argue that it's what happens after someone's D&D campaign by like 1,000 years. Yeah. This series or like the Thor series is like when you got to epic and you just keep on going.
Yes, it is.
It's exact opposite in that regard. And it's so like Alan Taylor could be interesting, and I think he makes choices, but I think they were playing it safe in the time that they were doing it. Like Game of Thrones had just started to hit the rise, like the clear rise in popularity.
Yeah.
I think this was like season 3 era.
Yeah, it was a big thing, but it wasn't like, oh my God.
Yeah, but like people knew like this is how people are starting to embrace fantasy and enjoy fantasy. And like there's a lot of Lord of the Rings style stuff. Like all the stuff with the elves at the beginning looks very Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
Along with this exposition and all that. I would rather have it be like, well, these are broken people who seize the opportunity of this convergence of realities to make their move. And in this case, that move has a personal stake because Jane has come into contact with the ether accidentally.
Yeah. It's a matter of happenstance that it becomes a personal vendetta for Thor.
And then let's get into Act 3.
Yeah.
Because this is all well and good talking about like how could Malekith be more compelling and whatnot. How can Act 3 be more compelling? There's good stuff going on in it.
Yes.
But oh my God, they need a cooler place to be fighting in besides Earth.
Yeah.
Like the Dark World in it is just like Rock Quarry World. And it's so dull.
Yeah.
So here's my pitch for this part of it, like this twist. They already wanted to set up some other worlds. Mm-hmm. They actually do show shots of other worlds.
Yeah.
What if in this whole escape from Asgard sort of sequence, which generally I enjoyed, having Loki sort of like lead the way out, to get to Malekith, they had to travel on foot between all the realms. And in doing so, they accidentally kept on starting shit along the way. Not major ones, but like where armed forces would be like these intruders from Asgard or something like that. Every single encounter, it doesn't need to be a ton of worlds, but we start, let's say 3 worlds.
Okay.
Like we see that like foresty world that Hogan the Grim is from, and we could see an ice world, something like that, where the people start following them, wondering what the hell is up. And, I would not have started the movie with them like, oh, and now we have peace. Like I would much rather have it all be a war-torn area.
Right.
So they think that the Asgardians are invading, and they follow the Asgardians, and then, we're at this next world. What's going on? Like, how'd we get here?
Everyone's confused.
And so it's almost kind of like the end of PCU.
Yeah.
Where it's like the end point where it's like, all the 9 realms saw you like almost give your life to defend them.
Yeah.
Like how? Because like they don't really, he's still in a different world. It's not like all reality is converged.
Right. And as well as the fact
what if
they can all get behind the idea of, wait, you want to end all existence? I'm part of all existence.
Well, what if all the realms actually had representatives there?
It'd be
like they were all
cool.
chasing after Thor. And maybe at that last moment, Thor like reveals the fact that like having gone through this whole thing, like the biggest part of the plan, and maybe that's the thing that Loki didn't even see, is that they weren't on the run really. What they were doing was that they were like drawing reinforcements that didn't even realize that they were reinforcements.
Yeah. That would be a good deal of fun.
Because like that last fight with Malekith is not very interesting for what Thor does. Like he's just there and he's like, he tanks, but he does not do any DPS.
Agreed.
And what would be really cool is if like they were like secretly using these like devices as they were to position people so that they could actually step forward and like assist Thor in fighting Malekith. Because like Malekith should be like, as you know, he's someone who's gone so far out there that whatever the grudges anyone has with Asgard, this is the worst option.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Asgard later. For now, let's deal with this guy.
Like, this one's not one of the bad ones. You're one of the bad ones.
Yeah. Like, this can still be talked out. Darkness, let's fight. And no, I think that would be a pretty excellent third act. And that would definitely be a good continuation of the mood shift when Thor breaks Loki out of prison. Because that carries with it a certain amount of, there's this great sequence of playing tricks on the expectations of the audience and of the characters. And that would be a wonderful masterstroke of Thor really pulling one over on Loki. And you could still have Loki sacrifice, and you can still have all of that happen. It wouldn't be, I don't think it would be too crazy to have the secret usurpation happen more towards the end of the film.
Yeah, because you could even have like, I'm kind of torn about the prison stuff earlier in the movie. I think it's kind of just like, oh, yet another movie where, oh, he just wanted to be captured so he could break out.
Yeah.
Kind of plots. And at least it's earlier in the movie, but it's so weird. And like, I'd almost rather they just attacked. Like what? Like nothing about the breakout really matters to their attack. It doesn't really like, I mean, I guess he lowers the shields in it, so it's kind of a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
But it's not a really effective one. You know, they're invisible foes. Like they could have just gotten in regardless.
Yeah.
Had them attack as like a SEAL team kind of strike that takes out the shields protecting the city, and then all the dark elf ships like attack more aggressively, you know, in mass.
Yeah, I agree.
So we could have gotten away of that, you know, that kind of silly plot point. But it does provide a way for like a lot of soldiers to be in one spot that are from different realms. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know.
And I mean, that's certainly why I take such a drastic cut with my change in thesis. Like, make it about something. And you already have the elements there. You're already giving their mother a bigger role and then killing her just to give Thor and Loki a reason to team up, which I have problems with, but, you know, figure that out. I
mean, they definitely wanted to do something with Rene Russo. There's a lot of casting in the first movie where you're like, oh, wow, you got big names. Okay, yeah. Okay.
And certainly, I don't remember if I mentioned this before, something that I think would have also helped is if they didn't have Jane pining over Thor. If they, you know, because yes, Thor was very eventful, the first film, and it was a lot of emotions and a lot was going on, but that was 2 years ago. And Jane is a scientist and she has her work, and whether she has a love life or not is immaterial. She's still doing her thing.
Oh, this is a good time to bring up timelines, by the way.
Okay.
The Thor, like, it's not that funky in this movie. Like, for the most part, it's just like, oh, it's been 2 years. But Loki is just arriving at Asgard. And I kind of feel like there should be like a feeling that some more time is passing from the first Avengers movie. Because there was Thor, and it's 2 years after the first Thor movie, but Avengers was only like a year before. So, like, what is that timeline for everything?
That is an excellent point. Do they establish that there's maybe like they drop Loki off and then Thor spends some time pacifying the Nine Realms? Is that what happens?
They don't really make that clear.
Yeah, I think that's what it's supposed to be, but they don't make that clear.
Right. It might be interesting to like start the movie with them having to actually get Loki back. Although I guess they've got the Tesseract, so I don't know. Like, that's the thing. They had the Tesseract. They should have, Thor should have just brought Loki immediately there.
Right. You could have had a wonderful sequence of Loki trying to pass the time in that prison. And that could have gotten interesting.
Yeah, instead of just like witnessing a prison break. Like that sequence just felt pointless.
I agree.
Aside from, again, like, oh, we have a master villain. But in this case, it's his dragon. It's not him.
Right. Or giving Loki agency in his mother's murder by telling him to take the stairway to the left.
Right.
But that's about it. So, yeah, it's a little... There's a lot of things where I see what you were trying to do, but this is ultimately cardboard. This isn't solid.
Yeah, with a lot of references. Like, clearly they love the Walt Simonson run. Like, Curse, obviously, and the fact that they use Malekith. Which, this one made me be like, oh, maybe we'll finally get Beta Ray Bill. Which, obviously they're never going to do that without it being, like, much deeper into the runs of the movies. Like, Thor 2 was not where Beta Ray Bill was going to show up.
It'd have been fun, but it would have been confusing.
Not sure how you're going to get there from where they left Thor. He was all cut off. And like I said, it's already lowering the stakes by having the Rainbow Bridge work.
I think that's something that could have happened mid-film or after the convergence broke.
Yeah, like maybe they fixed it and that's part of like how reinforcements are getting to them or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Like, why didn't Thor take the Tesseract, which would have been so much faster to get to Malekith? Oh, he didn't bring the Tesseract because actually, and like something Jane figured out, this is how the Tesseract could repair the Bifrost.
Yeah, having her there.
I really like that part right there.
Yeah,
gets Felvig, and then like that's like he's the one who like brings it all together to explain how to use the Tesseract on the Bifrost because he knows a lot about the Tesseract.
Yes, he does.
God damn it, that's actually a really good idea.
I think it'd be a lot of fun. I wanted there to be a lot more Jane in Asgard and Jane as the scientist. Because in the first Thor film, she's, a three-dimensional human being, but almost has a pathological love of like understanding and no, don't take my research and what is this and she doesn't get to do that nearly as much. She gets little glimmers and moments. But I think if they spent more time in Asgard, let there be a little more discovery between Thor and Jane, like not have this established relationship for them, but have like this strange, so we had that weird adventure a couple years ago. I've been thinking about you. I mean, I thought about it a little bit. Well, you're infected with the ether, so come with me to my home and we'll get that figured out. And have her running into Asgardian customs a little bit and bringing her scientific know-how. And at whatever point, bringing Selvig in that'd be brilliant. And it would be a very interesting closure as far as all of the strange things he's had happen to him.
Yeah, I mean, you can bring the whole team because you could also bring Kat Denning's character in and have that whole group. And that could actually be kind of like a fun twist on things. Like, where before they were trying to figure out things from Earth related to Asgard. Now in Asgard, they're the ones trying to put stuff together and like put pieces together. Like I don't want to like have it be one of the cliche of like, oh, but humans figure out things in a way that like other people can't. But I do like the idea of like maybe different perspectives. Like if the Asgardians look at things as like they forge science into their things, like they wear traditional armor because that's still how they think of things, but they make these incredible metals that have nanotechnology to create the plate and chainmail. And their hammers like house these power sources, but they're still a hammer. Like the way they look at things is like this medieval mindset that's been gifted with super science, as opposed to like having earned the science from start to finish. Kind of like in the series, like do you know the series The Uplift War and like the related books?
I don't.
It's the sci-fi novel series where the key detail is that humanity in the future has become a spacefaring race that has become accepted into galactic society. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, they are weird because they are the first race to ever make their way to space on their own, as far as anyone knows.
Oh.
That every other race has been stewarded into the galactic civilization from some from some form of hunter-gatherer or esque, or like some sort of like proto-sapient life.
Yeah.
So by this point, like by the time they like make contact, humans had begun doing experiments on dolphins and chimpanzees, and it earned them to be the right to be considered like a steward species unto themselves, which gave them new rights that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't done that.
Oh, cool.
And so there are races that are indentured to them, and humans are not so aggressive as some other ones. But there's like this weird galactic politics where like society goes back so far that no one remembers how it all works, and like how like who are the first races. They're so far back, it's crazy. But more importantly, a lot of societies have never figured out a lot of the basic things that we've figured, or not basic, but like the more advanced steps that we figured out, because they've always had access to resources that we didn't. So calculus is seen as like this like weird dark art that humanity like tries to put forward every now and then, because they've always had computers with infinite RAM who can crunch the numbers arithmetically to figure out all the trajectories and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Because they don't need to figure out proofs. They can just go as hard as like they can just compute as much as they need to.
Interesting.
And I love an idea that like maybe a younger race will put a perspective and have to learn ways to do things that isn't accurate or isn't like necessarily the most powerful way of things, but it's a different set of eyes.
Yeah, and it would be very interesting having Jane and Selvig doing that. And I am one that argues, as much as I love Darcy's character and as much as I love Kat Dennings as an actress, I don't see much point of having Darcy in this movie, but that would be an interesting justification, so you at least have a more non-scientist perspective, and it's not just, oh, humans are magical. It's, no, these two hyper-focused, very intelligent scientists have a unique perspective.
Yeah, and with Darcy as sort of like yet a different set of voices. Like in the first one, she's the one who like talked about the ancient aliens theory. Yeah. So maybe she's the one who like sees like puts together the things that were like, oh, this advanced thing and this advanced thing. Well, wait, maybe there's a connection between those two. Oh, Christ, that does make sense. We never thought about that.
She's the lateral thinker.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, that could be very cool. I'm liking that idea a lot right now.
Yeah, it's because, again, you had Asgardians on Earth for the first film. I know it feels cliche, but it really isn't to have the Earthlings in Asgard for the second one. Yeah, especially as you raise the stakes on the cosmic scale.
It'd be really fun to have either Natalie Portman or Kat Dennings go like another and smash something keep the customs.
Oh, Kat Dennings would totally Darcy would totally do that first.
100%.
And you wouldn't even have to have the bit of Volstagg doing it at the beginning. It would just be it would make an even better callback where she does it. Mm-hmm. Jane gets upset. She goes, "What? Thor did it," and she gets another.
Huh. Yeah, like no one is weirded out by it. Like Jane is mortified, but everyone else is just like, "Yep, okay, here you go."
And then there's just that oh, okay, and then it's connected.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been delightful. Oh God, I kind of want that more than anything now. Like we wasted Kat Dennings in this movie.
They wasted Kat Dennings. They wasted Natalie Portman. They wasted...
Well, Natalie Portman was kind of checked out in this movie.
I know. Well, they also... Again, they treat her as a love interest when there's so much more to that character.
She's a big character, but yeah, her interest is very small. They don't give her a lot to do that's interesting. Like they make her fused with the ether so that she's not just like leverage as a damsel in distress, but it doesn't quite work.
But that's just, putting a new hat on Malibu Stacy.
Yeah.
So I think giving the ether to bring her over, but then having her be a fresh scientific perspective in Asgard while everything comes to assault and attack and those stakes are there, it almost diffuses things to go back to Earth. It's weird. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I agree.
Let's kind of wrap this up. Because I think we have some good ideas. I think we can agree that this movie's not strong enough on its own.
We're making something that can stand on its own.
Yeah. So I'd say we cut the prologue, open a little bit more in media res, go from where we left off with the Avengers, and then sort of follow Thor a little bit. but don't have it like so neat. Like don't have them just wrap up these like wars on the other realms. Like have that be an ongoing problem that is creating constant trouble for them, where the 9 realms are difficult to get to because the Bifrost is still damaged from the first Thor movie, that big sacrifice he made, so that, it shouldn't just be like, well, because it's like, if you destroy it, you'll never find her again. 2 years later, we fixed it. It's cool.
And I'm Heimdall. I see everything.
Yeah.
It's cheapened.
Yeah, so make the destruction that was wrought on the Dark Elves much more Asgard's fault. That they have a quest for vengeance because Asgard is a terrible conqueror. Like if you come to them with diplomacy, it might be a different story, but if you try to fight them, they will do terrible things to you in their war. And that's not a good state to be in. And that's why there's a justified vengeance from them. Bring all these humans that we find so interesting and fun. Like all these characters are great. The actors are good actors. Bring them to Asgard to be fish out of water after the other movie was the reverse of that. So this will be a nice kind of touch for the characters. We can really like make the best out of the strengths of all these actors. Still spends time with Tom Hiddleston as Loki because he was blowing up at the time. It makes no sense not to.
And the chemistry that Hemsworth and Hiddleston have is fantastic on screen.
Yeah, I could use with him saying, "You still don't trust me, brother," a little bit less, because I think he says it like 4 times during their like escape sequence.
Yeah, it's true.
Which it's like, no, of course he doesn't still. Nothing has changed. It's been like a day.
Pretty much.
And not even. But I do enjoy sort of like their escape kind of thing, but make the merging of the worlds the interesting way that they're able to get from realm to realm. Like that is the reason why the lack of the Bifrost doesn't lock them out of things. But it does make it a race against time, because not only do they have to beat Malekith, they also have to not get trapped where they are.
Agreed.
And just have Malekith be like a little bit more compelling about the loss that his people have faced, and not just like, oh, I just want to make things dark.
Yeah, and it would suit Eccleston's portrayal of Malekith far better. That he's broken and hateful and burning. And that would suit even more that kind of vengeance.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think that all sounds like a stronger movie, and you could actually keep the threat more focused off Earth.
Yeah.
Like Earth could play a part in the finale, and like they could have come to Earth a couple of times, but the actual threat is to the 9 realms. It's not just to one realm.
Mm-hmm.
So that would all be nice. And I think just stop trying to make it Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of it that's really trying to ape Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, and just sort of embrace the fact that we're not talking about your starter characters in this like low level, low magic campaign. We're talking about like very, very much the epic level characters where they have hammers that can crack the world.
We have gods in space.
Yeah.
This is not 3rd level D&D.
Yeah. Bounded accuracy has no place here. This
Pretty much.
This is like power creep levels of Pathfinder or 4th edition. This is not 5e or
This is not old school Renaissance. This is level 27 Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of all this, just a quick little thing. I realize it'd be hilarious if you start with Selvig in the mental hospital. He never gets checked out, but Thor comes and gets him while he's in there.
Oh, that'd be great.
It'd be a great bit of comedy. It'd be a wonderful bit of like hilarity at the end when he comes back, and it would also honestly neaten things up a little bit. It would get him involved without having to have extra steps.
Yeah, you could even reverse the scene with Natalie Portman not getting rained on, where like Selvig's like sitting out in the garden or something, and like just rain starts falling on him alone, and all of a sudden Thor lands like right in front of him.
Yes.
And he just like grabs him and like they like take off.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
and he can still even have the throughout the medication moment if you want that, but it would just it would be a very fun twist.
All right, man. These sound like some really good ideas. I hope that everyone can kind of get behind it. It's it's a harder movie because it's so in the middle. It's the 8th Marvel movie of that universe, and well before we even get into sort of like the next gear shift in the Marvel movies. Like Winter Soldier is really where I'd argue that Phase 2 truly begins. Like Iron Man 3 kind of could just be like, oh yeah, it's the immediate follow up.
Yeah.
But Winter Soldier is where like the stakes for the rest of ever since really have really kicked in. So this
was
movie,
a big status quo shift. Yeah, this one's more of this is the clutch shift of the entire MCU. They are changing up gears, and this is that moment when they're where they put it in neutral.
Yeah, tread water before you take a dive.
Exactly.
Is how I would say it. But yeah, thanks for talking this out with me, man. I'm so happy to have you on and to talk about this with you. Where can people find you?
Well, I have my video game podcast, Fun and Games, which is having a small bit of a hiatus as I'm in the middle of I'm in a very busy show schedule right now. I'm in a show in New York City. So Matt and I are trying to get some episodes put together, but we'll be back soon. I'll put some stuff up about scheduling.
Everyone should be checking out Jeff's podcast, when they're done doing that, they should be checking out certainpov.com, where you can check out this podcast, all of our other ones, the Star Wars RPG, which we have now named the Scruffy Nerf Herders, our main show, Certain Point of View. But you can find all of that on certainpov.com. Next time, we're going to be talking about Highlander 2: The Quickening. But until then, stay scruffy, my Nerf Herders.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. All right, so like I said, come out swinging on this one. There's like really very little time between us starting the episode and getting into complaints about the episode, or about the movie, I should say.
Right. For sure. Do you, now hearing it back, feel that you feel the same?
I think that the movies that have come since this conversation occurred have done a lot to rehabilitate both this movie and the Thor franchise as a whole. We mentioned in the episode that it's right before Ragnarok was set to come out, and we had seen the trailers, so we knew like the tone and we were all excited about it, but we hadn't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one thing that really has rehabilitated the franchise as a whole. And then, of course, in Avengers Endgame, which I believe I reference predictively that it's like, because I reference, or it's the Infinity Stones, like, oh, right. Well, they're, it's going to come around in some way when we get to the last Avengers movie. And it actually does. What I couldn't have predicted at the time was that they were literally going to time travel during this movie, and have scenes that sort of like add additional nuance and character, particularly to Rene Russo, in a way that's like, okay, yeah, no, we're giving some fun stuff to this. We're making us like kind of nostalgic for this era here. I don't think it really changes my take on the movie as a whole, but it certainly softens some of the frustrations that I had with the movie at the time, because I like the Thor franchise. I talk about how I would have really loved to delve more into like Walt Simonson kind of like craziness. And I really would have liked the Thor property to have a fair swing on screen. And I was worried at the time that this movie may have like kind of killed the momentum, combined with the fact that the first one also wasn't like the strongest like out the gate of all the Marvel movies. You know, like Thor's a cool series, but like there's some weird bullshit and you got to be in for it. And like, it's hard to strike that balance.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I will say that this movie kind of struck me for how it looked at the time relative to the larger, like the larger MCU franchise. Like Iron Man 3, I would argue looks more like a Phase 1 movie in terms of its like color palette. And I weirdly say like it's dark in tone, and then I immediately like go on to explain that I'm talking about color tone. But like there's like one point where I say that in the episode, and just like, no, what I mean is that it's very amber, and there's like the color scheme is on the darker side. It's a little bit more muted at some spots, but with these warm colors for everything. And I will say that I am more appreciative of it now, considering that so many of the movies have really started to blend together, and that initial kind of design that was a little bit of a refinement of the previous like orange and teal, everything color corrected, you know, look that was going on in blockbusters going into it. And like Marvel just like looked like a little bit cleaner, you know, just like a hair difference. Like, you know, Iron Man 1 looks not that far off from a Michael Bay movie, but there's just like something about it that like is just, you know, just a little bit less like harsh.
No, I agree with you on that one. Yeah.
And that goes all the way through the Avengers and through Iron Man 3. And then this one I felt like had like you start seeing a different color palette. And at the time it was like kind of jarring to me, and it was still a little jarring because like it was like weird that Avengers 2 had that more like amber kind of color palette to, you know, as well. But now that we're, you know, so far out from that, and like there's way more of a breadth of movies, and like in a lot of ways we're like really asking for more of these movies to have that kind of color palette. I am more appreciative of the way it's shot.
Yeah, I honestly really loved the color palette in this. I think we've talked about this before, where I've always say that like the superheroes that are more colorful are always like my jam. So I enjoyed, you know, that, because I'm so tired of seeing drab superhero movies, which for a while was a staple, definitely of DC. But yeah, no, I actually like really liked the way that this movie was shot, and I thought there was a lot of design elements that went into the set and the armor and costuming that was pretty cool, and like really you could tell that the designers really went for it, you know. So that is definitely a positive for me with this film. This film is still, I don't know if it's my least favorite, because there are some MCU films, like I haven't seen Quantumanium, so I don't know, but this is one of my least favorite of the MCU films. I just think that it's kind of a train wreck of a film, like just like as a film. And I know the internet has had nostalgia for it, and there's a bunch of people who were kids when they first saw this, and they're like, this movie is amazing. It's not. And I think my biggest issues are, and I think this is true for like the first two films of the Thor franchise for me, is that I just feel like there's never enough time to kind of sit with the two main leads. I never really feel a real connection between Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth, and I always just feel like it'd just be better to just always just have him act with Tom Hiddleston, because he and Tom Hiddleston are great together.
We talk about that in the episode, that like Natalie Portman had been sold on Patty Jenkins being the director, and was not enthusiastic about the switch to Alan Taylor and like the story that ultimately was coming out. Like, so she certainly got you know, a bit of a bait and switch, and then was like left to be, you know, fairly sullen about it. And I understand that, but yes, it does not contribute to the fact that their chemistry just is not particularly amazing. Like, I remember in the first Thor movie there were interviews, and you could see that at the very least it was like, oh, this is a very attractive man, and she's like registering that in those like early encounters. But in this movie, we're just not getting it in the same way. There's some good moments, like there's the like you brought me to see your mom moment, like there's spots there where it's kind of cute, and you're like, all right, but yeah, it's also like the whole like the fact that like there's so much of the B plot for her is about like her romantic situations, like with the guy
which
from the
is
IT
so
crowd.
frustrating. I think in general, like one of the ways that this movie really rubs me the wrong way is having her whole subplot be about that, having like so much of it be about like you guys mentioned it in the episode, and it's so spot on, having her pining away for like 2 years for Thor. Like, okay, look, he's a god, I get it, but also I don't get it. Like, like, even if she's like secretly holding a torch for this guy who disappeared on her, she shouldn't be sitting at home in pajamas and ice cream unless it's just because that's what brings her joy. Like it was very, very annoying to me, because there's nothing wrong with sitting at home in your pajamas and eating ice cream, guys. There's nothing wrong with it. But the implication that she's just like a really sad person because this guy, and like, you're out here wearing lady clothes. It was annoyed me, and it still annoys me when I was rewatching it, because I did rewatch it for the first time when did this come out? I don't know. We'll just say over 10 years. Because I saw this once in theater and I was like, I'm done. Because I just felt like the movie was such a mess, and I felt that it has pacing issues and it drags sometimes. And although there were great moments, it just wasn't enough to really sell this film to me. But yeah, and killing off her neighbors, I know you wanted to do something with her, but I hated it.
Yeah. I mean, the scenes weren't necessarily the worst, but like it felt so fridgy.
Yeah, it just felt very convenient. Like, let's give this woman, she's a great actress, so let's give her something to do. We'll give her a semi-fight scene, and then she'll die, and then the two guys will have a reason to band together, which, like, they don't really need like Loki and Thor always teaming up, and Loki's always backstabbing him, and then they team up again. That's the nature of their relationship, right? That's just like who they are. Also, I noticed way before, I was just like, he's just arriving, and I'm so glad you guys mentioned that in the thing, because I was just like, wait, what? Why would it take that long? I don't understand. Like, there's just like a lot of screwy things about the timeline and about just like how everything kind of comes to be. It just feels like this weird vehicle just to have like this fantasy moment. And I really loved the idea of bringing the human troop into Asgard that you spoke about in the episode. I thought, well, how much more fun would that have been? Because
the idea of Kat Dennings going like another and smashing it, she would nail that line.
She would, and it would have been fun, and it would have been like, something that's just like really given us a chance also to get to see Thor's friends again and maybe get to have more scenes with them. I also really hated that they had like that weird, like they had Sif be like territorial and kind of like quietly combative with Jane. Like, I was like, this just feels unnecessary. Like, yes, she's gonna guard Thor. Yes, that's her friend. But like, I just felt like it was so like hitting women against women in a movie where you're already underwriting the female lead so that she's just pining away, even though she's still a scientist and all of this stuff, and she could have just buried herself in work, but no, she's gonna sit at home on her days off and just eat ice cream and be made fun of by her friend. And then you fridge someone's mom, and then you have his female friend be like passive aggressively kind of hostile to the girl he's brought in. And I was just like, I hate all of these beats for all the women in this film.
Yeah, it's certainly not. It might technically pass the Bechdel test. I'm not really sure, but it's certainly not really doing anything generous to women or in its portrayals.
No. I mean, and I think this is a problem that the MCU has had, since the beginning, and I think that it's gradually gotten better. But I think in film in general, like, there is this issue where they mistake aggression for power or strength, and especially in women. And so, like, they're like, oh, how could they not be amazing? Civ has a weapon, Freya held a weapon. These women are powerful. And it's like, but you're not using them in powerful ways. You are like making them at odds with each other. You're making them be fridged, and you are putting Jane in a position where, like, the second or even the most important thing in her life is losing this dude and maybe having him come back again. Like, that's her storyline. And so I can understand why Natalie Portman would be frustrated with this role in general, because the truth is, like, this movie does an incredible disservice to the women of its cast. Because even Kat Denning is just punchlines. Like, that's all she is, really.
Yeah, we say in the episode that, like, it seems like there's no reason for her to be there in the movie that we got.
Yeah.
I mean, she gives one particularly good punchline in there when she says meow meow. But
right.
Which I guess I don't know.
No, it is funny. Listen, she has got great comedic timing. But in the first movie, she made more sense, right? And she was an assistant, and she has great computer skills, which we've seen her because she was in WandaVision. She was called in for that stuff. Yeah. So she is an intelligent character, right? She's just sarcastic and kind of like offbeat, and Jane's the genius, but she's still smart. She's still, like, in this sciencey computer world. She is a lab assistant for, all, even though they don't really define her, right? She knows the science. She understands the science. She's making systems for the science. They just never define what extent she understands, right? Like, in the MCU, they kind of just plug her in. And this is, again, another disservice to her character, because we never get a full definition, and she's just the quirky, funny friend who also types stuff on the computer. We don't really get that. And we had an opportunity in this film to maybe get some more of that, right? And I think, honestly, if we had gone with your pitch and been in Asgard, it would have been so much more fun to see her, like, creatively work with Jane to figure things out, because clearly that's how their dynamic works. And it would have been so much more interesting. She could have still been really funny. She could have made best friends with one of Thor's friends. Like, Jane could have been totally confused about it. Maybe it would have been Sif. Like, Sif is like, don't hurt him. And then, like, Darcy's just like her best friend. She's like, yes, another. And, it would kind of just solve some of it for me.
I mean, I keep on thinking, there's no one of Thor's friends that would be particularly better than any other, because I keep thinking, how cute would it be of, like, a Darcy and Hogan the Grim
oh pairing, my God,
or Volstagg the Voluminous, like and even Fandral, like, all of them would, so basically what I'm saying is, like, no, why even say just one? It could be the Warriors 3 and Sif.
Exactly. And you know what, there's a interesting thing. Both, I think you said it in the episode. You said, stop trying to make it Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
But here's the thing. They're missing the best parts of the Lord of the Rings. And the best part of Lord of the Rings is when people are sitting around the fire talking. And how great would it have been to have a drinking game where basically the three and Sif are teaching Darcy a drinking game.
Right?
And they're like, holy shit, she's winning. And she's beating these Asgardians at this drinking game. Like, while like, and like, Jane could be like, hello, I'm dying. Like, dark matter inside me. And Darcy's like, yeah, we'll figure that out. You know,
Yeah.
just be amazing. Because I think this movie is kind of like this jumbled mess that is missing the humor. And I know that some people feel that the two later films, especially Thor and Thunder, got a lot of flack for it, have too much comedy in it. But I think that this one is so kind of, it's boring. And also this, again, what I always complain about, the villain is not great. He's kind of, I mean, he's fine. Like he's got a thing, but also, like you said, why just the darkness, right? Like he doesn't. It's so much more interesting the way that you guys presented it in the episode, where you have him have a real like want to, to have this nation who's been beat down by the Asgardians and trying to reclaim their space and like take revenge and all of that. Like that juxtaposition is so much more interesting to me. And like,
Which I'll note they actually address in Thor Ragnarok, but we couldn't have known that at the time.
Right. We didn't know that at the time. And so I think you need to know that, right? Like that's one of my issues with the prequels of Star Wars, is just like, if I have to watch extra media to get to this, I don't know that this is actually a good movie. I want movies to be able to tie into other things, but to exist on their own, right? Like to be able to, and I know they want to sell us tickets, and this is the beginning of them kind of doing this thing where like you got to watch them all in order to understand. Like I think up until this point,
I mean, it's a weird one in that it is actually not required from the standpoint of what the actual like plot of the movie is, but for the significance of any of it to matter, it requires both movies that came before and after.
Right, exactly. It's such a strange entry into this series. For sure. I think in general, I think I would either just have everything happen at Asgard, and maybe even like, if you're going to treat Jane so poorly, not even include her and just make it a Loki and Thor film.
Well, listening back, I really like my pitch of it being like, oh, they start running through the different realms. Like, how cool.
That'd be amazing.
And then like start building an army by having them chase after them, PCU style. Like, I was like, wait, this is great. I'm so proud of myself for that one. Go me.
And honestly, like, you really cannot beat the chemistry that Hiddleston and Hemsworth have together. Like, the two of them just really connect. Like, I actually feel that their performance in Thor 1 is what saves that first Thor movie for me, because I have my qualms with that movie as well. I enjoyed it, but it is like, out of like the first phase, it is one of the it's one of the weaker films. But their relationship and like that, the last act of it is so good that it almost makes you forgive the rest of everything else where it falls short, because you're like, oh my God, yeah, so I may have, not that I want to write women out of the story, absolutely not, but I just think that they could have come back to Jane later. They could have done something with just all the worlds and Asgard, and like really made it like Thor can't get back to Earth right now. Like, he's too busy like taking care of the things that he needs to take care of, like all these things he has to settle. And I just think that it would have been a much more fun movie.
Yeah. I think there's a tone that they could have struck that would have been more appropriate for what we knew at the time Hemsworth could do with the Thor franchise, even if it had only been once, which is that the tone of like Thor from the first Avengers movie is an appropriate level of like, oh, Hemsworth is funny. Like, it was the Joss Whedon score or script, which is like, a particular style of humor, but he nailed it when he was doing it. And I think that we could have gotten to sort of a style and a mood like in Avengers Infinity War. Because that specifically, I think, hits a really interesting balance of Hemsworth being funny, but still being a god, and still being a god in a godly kind of quest that interacts interestingly with more traditional sci-fi elements, like the adventure to get Stormbreaker like with Rocket and with Groot as the sort of like more traditional sci-fi kind of companions, means that there's this like interesting fusion of the super science and then like the god science and magic are kind of just one thing, just perspective element of it all, that I think it would have been perfect. Like, I think that that's the area that this movie is overly leaning into. No, they are wielding weapons, and that are actually energy weapons, and they're all this stuff is actually just super science, but we just like make it look like it's retro, which is a harder balance. Like, I think it's more interesting if it feels like that's the technology that they're coming from, and I talk about that with like condensed star stuff as like when I talk about their weapons being that way. But I feel like we've seen it appropriately, and I feel like we always end up talking about Endgame more because it's the conclusion, but Infinity War like nails that larger than life Thor who is still funny. Like it's
right.
Ragnarok is going a little too far for some people, and Love and Thunder went way too far for some people. But I think that Infinity War is just about as perfect as you can kind of get in terms of like that the god stuff is there and it feels huge and epic, but Hemsworth is a really compelling lead to sort of like carry the story through, especially how people react to him, and that it's like that's the right level of mood for the character that I think that this movie could have really benefited from, like having Hemsworth still be funny even though he's in this huge epic quest,
right?
And allow for like have Kat Dennings be there, have Selvig be there. I think that I think that you can have Jane and just have the situation be that her opening whole bit is that Selvig is in the mental institute and she's trying to get him out. Like you have a perfectly obvious setup for like what she's up to when we like check back in with her, and then at least it's not dealing with like her love life.
Yeah, and it's strange too how just because you brought this up, and I thought it when I was first watching it, and I thought it again on my rewatch. It's strange how very little Jane seems to care about Smellik, like his disappearance, the fact that you see him on TV like being arrested, and like all the like I don't really feel like she like does anything to like check in with him, like so I think it would have been, it's so strange. It's like and his like reappearance is played for like comedy and it's shown on the news, but like her team doesn't really comment on it, and this is someone who like they worked with very closely in the last movie,
right?
And I know it's been 2 years, but there's no real explanation as to like why like they were just like, yeah, he disappeared on us. Like, wouldn't you be worried? Wouldn't you care?
Yeah.
Like, and then they show this on TV, and it's like it would have made sense for someone to catch him. I mean, at least Darcy or something, or the intern whose name I can't remember because I don't know why they add him because there's enough characters. And
Darcy needed a man to talk to. Otherwise, like, who else was she going to talk to? Certainly not Jane.
Not Jane. She's busy trying to date or find Thor again.
Let me be clear. When I say that, like, this movie might not pass the Bechdel test, I'm, like, actually thinking about it. And, like, I didn't do a rewatch for this app recording, but, like, I am thinking about the movie and, like, trying to recall, like, to be clear, like, Darcy talks to Jane a lot, but a lot of it is about her relationships.
Yeah.
Or it's about the bad guy, which still is failing the Bechdel test. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even when they're there, I mean, like, I guess, like, Civ and her, like, Civ and Jane may say a couple of things to each other, but
it's mostly about Thor.
yeah. And also, I'm pretty sure that the one scene where they don't really talk about him, it's like really just a few seconds, because she says, "I'm not hungry." And then Civ knocks out a bunch of people and she's like, "Good, follow me." And then she follows her and then she hands her over to Thor. So it's like literally seconds of them not discussing anything, because it's literally her just coming into the room and being like, so basically Jane says to a guard, "I'm not hungry." And then Civ comes in, beats them up, and then goes, "Good, follow me." That's it. That's like maybe the only lines where they're not talking about Thor, where there might not be two women talking about Thor, because even Freya and Jane, when they talk about Thor.
Yeah. Man, yeah. Like, I'm sure that it probably technically qualifies, but it is a movie that I'm having a hard time thinking of any scene where it would. Not that it couldn't, and like that's the wild thing. It's just you know, it was still not a terrible movie, but it was one of the worst Marvel movies at the time, and while I think that there is stuff to like in it, like we just talked about Selvig's like whole asylum bit, I find it really funny when he's like running around naked, like that's charming. Like,
Well, he's a good actor, and he sells it, like, you know, for sure. And like, he really truly believes, like, this is craziness. People are not believing him, but he's right.
Yeah. Right, so it's just a movie that was like, well, we are contractually obliged to carry on with like the group from the first movie, but we don't want to do that. We just want to do, you know, I say that it's like it needs to stop being Lord of the Rings, and frankly, it needs to be the Silmarillion. Like, it needs to be that level of epic over the humans living in the world of like crazy epic stuff. And that's the thing that this movie is just kind of should have been a little bit more of, you know, like lean into just how like big and huge and grandiose Thor is, and like make the world seem huge and not just like I say like the quarry world that they seem to just like travel to exclusively.
They love that.
Yeah,
it's a very cheap set, I think. I think that might be why.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was pretty proud of the pitches. It's fascinating looking at this early episode, which is definitely like a different energy than some of the other ones, where I would say it's roughly 2/3 of the episode is us discussing pitches. And it's really way more of the time of us like treating it as a game, which it still is. But like, I used to actively call like doing an episode playing, because it was us just like really like spitballing and just like going back and forth and like really riffing for a while. And, you know, we haven't been able to do that as much in part because like, you know, we all just need to know the movie really well to kind of like exist in that kind of space. And we need to, you know, keep it, you know, organized with guests who aren't necessarily as familiar with like the format. Like, this is Geoff's like 6th appearance and it's like the 12th episode.
Right.
Like, I think he was the number 1 guest at this point. And he and then Ben and Addie are going to compete. So I guess technically Addie, because Ben at this point hadn't done an episode solo yet. So like Addie and Geoff are like competing for like most times on the show. And they're intimately familiar because like it's like episode 12 and like I've had like 4 guests or like 4 groups of guests at this point.
Right. Geoff, king of the early guests.
Yep. And, you know, again, the voice of the podcast because he does the intro and outro. Yeah. So, like I said, I was pretty happy with this episode. It's quick. And like I said, it comes out swinging. There isn't like the preamble that would normally come, and I can hear some audio quality issues when I listen to it. But it's fine. It's an early episode of the show.
Yeah, but it's good, and both of you, you're good friends, so that does help. But you both gel really well, and I think the pitches are nice because they're very collaborative and. Yeah, I actually think that any of the pitches that were in there would have made this movie better.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like that kind of covers our big ticket items for this episode.
Yep.
So a little bit of housekeeping for those of us keeping track. This episode is going to be dropping right after our episode on King Arthur. Which is a fun episode discussing a very mid movie. I was shocked when revisiting it that I was like, it's not great, right? And then it's like, oh, it's so medium. I can barely recall. And then the next full episode of Another Pass coming out is a 5th episode. So it will be an episode that, of course, is a movie that overcame adversity. And this one's a little bit of a stretch to say that it overcame adversity because it was a box office bomb and had, outraged people, because we're talking about a John Waters movie. We're talking about A Dirty Shame. So that is an exciting one because we've got Wes Johnson, who is actually in the movie, joining us for that. And he is great. Awesome. He's a very prolific voice actor. So he pulls out voices like crazy while we're recording. And so he's just a delight to have on, and just a wonderful person that I'm glad I've made contact with. Meanwhile, for app episodes, let's see. So previously we did Ninja Turtles 3, which was a really fun episode. And that was with Addie. And next up on app, we're going to be looking at Zoolander 2. Which, man, I that was such a weird early episode pick, but Ben was like dead set. He was like, yeah, we can make a better movie than this. And I was like, I don't know if we can, man. Like, the first Zoolander was like pretty much exactly what it needed to be and doesn't need a sequel. And I think we get into some really good discussion points. It made me think very critically about Zoolander 2, which is not a sentence that most people have ever said.
No, I'm actually very much looking forward to listening to this episode, and then rewatching Zoolander 2, which I haven't seen in years, because I feel like it's gonna open my eyes to something, because I've never thought about that movie critically at all.
I might have to do a rewatch for this one because this is a movie that I cannot recall very well. It is one that I remember thinking was better than I expected, but I don't remember where that bar actually landed.
Listen, I'm gonna say this. I think like the Zoolander films were fever dreams, and that's I'm honestly, I remember them like fever dreams. I'm not sure where one begins and the other ends, to be honest with you. I know I did see them both. I just don't remember them. Blue Steel. That's it. That's all I remember.
That's fair. I will say that I feel that the first Zoolander was very much a moment that hit very well and had some great performances in there. And the second one, I think, is fine, but I think it has less to say. And we'll talk about that next time. So we'll talk to y'all then.
Can't wait.
Yeah. In the meantime, where can people find you and follow you, Sam?
You can find me on the Discord if I remember that it exists, and here, of course, whenever we drop this podcast. And other than that, I will be too busy watching Zoolander 1 and Zoolander 2 to answer any communications from the outside world. So if you have any complaints about what I said, you can find Case at.
Well, you can find me on the Discord, like you said, which you can find links at certainpov.com. Otherwise, you can find me on most of the platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm still going by my AIM screen name, which I'm holding on to for dear life, and that is Quetzalcoatl5, because I wanted something hard to spell and pretentious. And yeah. So you find me there. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this show, pass it on. I got it right.
I thought you were going to say, stay scruffy, my nerd herders.
Whiff it both ways.
Yeah, just do both.
All right, Josue, let's go through our new Comic Day stack. We have a lot to review.
I know. Maybe we've gone too far.
Well, let's see. Marvel, of course. DC.
I Got Image, Dark Horse,
Black Mask, Boom, IDW.
Aftershock, Vault, of course, Mad Cave,
Oni, Valiant, Scout.
Magma, Behemoth.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, all we need now is a name for our show. We need a name for our show about reviewing comic books every week. Something clever, but not too clever.
Like a pun? It's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it's something that seems funny at first, but we might regret later on as an impulsive decision a few dozen episodes in.
Yeah, we'll think of something.
Join Keith and Josue for We Have Issues, a weekly show reviewing almost every new comic released each week. Available on Geek Elite Media and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Do we do a clap for Case?
We do a clap for Case. All right, 1, 2, 3, and then clap. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
Okay.
Sometimes when you're like 1, 2, 3 and clap, I almost like clap on the because I'm so trained when you say 1, 2, 3 to clap.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot more sense when there's more than just us, because like we're
I've got to tell them what I'm doing. Yeah.
but like since you're so used to doing it, right? You still just do the 1, 2, 3 and then clap. Okay, ready? And I'm like, I'm always like, and I just kind of move forward to clap, and I'm like, oh wait, no, that was the.
That was the. This is Case's like programming.
Programming. We have to get through the programming first.
Oy. Anyway, I feel good about this episode. It was we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Cool.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.